Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. I want to apologize up front if my voice is a little ragged. I'm recording this episode on Sunday night. Last night, Saturday night, I was at the Arkansas-Tennessee game, and if you saw the result of that game or if you watched the game, there was a lot of yelling involved. Of course, I will always have love for my Florida State Seminoles, no matter what their record is, but it was nice to see the team of my childhood, the team of my home state, get such a big win on Saturday. But the voice has been through a lot this weekend. I'm going to try to power through. Also, before I start, I just want to remind you, if you haven't joined yet as a member here on the channel, memberships are now available. You'll get free custom emoji. You'll get early access to videos like this one. And I'm working on some other stuff as we get further into this whole process. So I'd love to have you become a member here on the channel, get some goodies, and, just kind of experience things a little differently. But if you don't want to be a member, that's great too. I'm just happy that you're here. And let's jump into the box office results for this past weekend, which there's really no other way to put it, was an absolute catastrophe for Joker, Folie, Deux, as well as Warner Brothers. Everything that could possibly have gone wrong with the release of this movie went wrong, from the box office results to the reviews to the fan reaction. So we have a lot of stuff to break down. And if you remember, a few weeks back here on the channel, I did a video about Joker 2, which I'll probably use as a bit of a shorthand in this episode, and what its prospects at the box office might be. And I said that even though it had hit the early 3-week tracking at $70 million, that things didn't really look to be heading in that direction, and they certainly didn't. And that's why I will reiterate once again that tracking is something that is generally only useful if a movie performs as expected. Some movies do, some movies don't. Joker, Folie à Deux is one of those movies that absolutely did not perform as expected because of reviews and because of what people thought when they actually saw the movie. So let's jump into the box office top 10 for this past weekend. At number 1 is Joker, Folie à Deux, which came in at an estimate of $40 million. However, those totals have been declining all weekend. I would not be surprised if Warner Brothers put in an estimate at $40 million and it came in the high 30s. Instead, it's just a little bit better, maybe psychologically, if you don't go down into that $30 million range. We'll see what happens when actual numbers come out later today. The Wild Robot comes in second place. It dropped 47.8% in weekend number 2 for an $18.7 million total. Its domestic total right now is at $63.9 million. Keep in mind, though, that the Wild Robot basically lost all of its premium screens this past weekend to Joker 2. So we will see what it does next weekend and the weeks going forward to see if that really positive word of mouth is able to boost the film a little bit more than it did in weekend number 2, although a sub 50% drop-off isn't terrible. Beetlejuice is in third place. It drops 36.4%. It continues to hold well, and I think probably should if Warner Brothers decides to keep it in theaters through Halloween. They may as well keep one movie in theaters that's actually making money. $10.3 million in its fifth weekend. Its domestic total is now at $265.5 million. In fourth place is Transformers 1, which dropped 41.6% for a $5.3 million total. Its domestic total is at $47.2 million. No real game changer there for the disappointing box office prospects for that movie. Speak No Evil stays in fifth place. It's holding pretty well for a horror film, even though the totals aren't huge. It dropped 34.2% in its fourth weekend of release for a $2.8 million total. Its domestic total right now is at $32.5 million. In sixth place was Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal. I am not familiar with Sam and Colby. I know that they are YouTubers. But hey, as a fellow YouTuber, it's always nice to see somebody else here on the platform breaking through. This was a limited release through Cinemark, which they did after a test run last year. It made $1.7 million and is good enough for sixth place. In seventh place, the much-delayed release of White Bird, A Wonder Story, finally happened. It's another low grosser for Lionsgate. It came in at $1.5 million, but if there is a silver lining, it's that White Bird received an A+ cinema score, which, as we will talk about in a few minutes, was far higher than the cinema score given to Joker, Folie à Deux. So, White Bird, A Wonder Story, its long road to theaters is finally at an end. Deadpool and Wolverine comes in 8th place in its 11th week of release with another $1.52 million. Its domestic total is now at $633.8 million. The Substance re-enters the top 10. We'll also talk about that in a few minutes with a 34.5% drop off in week number 3 for a $1.3 million total. Its domestic total now just under $10 million. And in 10th place for now, we'll see how the final numbers come in, is Megalopolis, which dropped 73.8% in weekend number 2 for a total of just over $1 million. Its domestic total right now stands at $6.4 million. Look at that drop though, 73.8%. Keep in mind that Megalopolis had a better cinema score than Joker 2. Megalopolis had a D+, Joker 2 got a D cinema score, so with better audience reaction, we saw a 73-ish% drop for Megalopolis in weekend number 2. What does that mean for Joker Folie Deux and its second weekend? I think we're going to see a massive drop-off, but that's next week's show. Let's worry about this week's show first. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the absolute catastrophe that the Joker ran into this past weekend. It opened to roughly the same amount as Morbius did a couple of years ago, although Morbius cost less than half as much and still only ended up at about $75 million domestically with a better audience reaction. So we are looking at a very real possibility that Joker Folie Deux comes in under $100 million domestically, which, I mean, for a movie that people were forecasting to be one of the biggest hits of the fall, that's not great. Also not great for theaters that were looking for this to be a big October tentpole. It's not their fault that people aren't going to show up. It's very much on the movie. And one of the big reasons that this was such a terrible opening weekend was that Joker Folie Deux had a very big budget, a substantial increase from the first Joker film. Some people have said $200 million. There's been more reporting saying it's $190 million, and I haven't really seen anyone dispute that $190 million figure. So I wanted to look at just where this ranks as far as movies that cost that much and opened that low. I had to do a little bit of research here to find out which movies actually had budgets in that $190+ million range. So these are the 10 lowest openings for movies that had confirmed budgets, meaning I did not find conflicting reports about how much they cost. We'll go over some of the other movies that may have cost as much as Joker Folie Deux. So these are the 10 worst openings for movies that I could find that had confirmed, meaning I didn't find conflicting information, $190+ million budgets. I did exclude any COVID-era releases, movies like Tenet, as well as day-and-date releases, movies that were released on HBO Max at the same day they were released in theaters, because I didn't quite think that was a fair comparison. At number 1 is Killers of the Flower Moon, a reported budget of $200 million. It opened to $23.2 million. Then we have Battleship. I know it's been a while since that movie came out. $25.5 million opening, a reported budget of around $220 million, believe it or not. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom comes in third place at $27.8 million. That was a weird frame for it. It came in right around the Christmas holidays. It actually ended up legging out much more than that opening would indicate. The Lone Ranger comes in fourth at $29.2 million, a reported budget on that film of around $225 million. Then we had Elemental from last summer at $29.6 million. It had a respectable run domestically and even better internationally, but still not a great opening for its budget point. Then we have John Carter, which opened to $30 million, a reported budget around $260 million, and I have not adjusted these numbers for inflation. That movie was insanely expensive and insanely unsuccessful. In seventh place, we had Dark Phoenix, which opened to $32.8 million off of a $200 million reported budget. And then we have Joker Folie Deux with a reported $40 million opening. That's estimated. It could go down, could go up, but more likely to go down. And that $190 million budget point. Then we have Terminator Salvation, which opened to $42.5 million off a $200 million cost. And finally, Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, another Warner Brothers franchise that went south at a $42.1 million opening off of a $200 million budget. Now, there are some movies that could potentially have had higher budgets than Joker 2 that would have opened lower, but I found conflicting reports. Wish would be one of those movies, which opened to $19.6 million. Napoleon, another movie starring Joaquin Phoenix that had a massive budget and very little return at $20.6 million for its opening weekend. Then we have The Golden Compass, Jack the Giant Slayer, Disney's A Christmas Carol, Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. We're really stretching back. And again, if you adjusted that number for inflation, it would be significantly higher. 2017's The Mummy, 2010's Robin Hood, Pacific Rim, which I liked but did not have a great opening weekend, and then Onward, which almost, I think, really qualifies as a COVID release. It was maybe one of the last movies that did not really have an effect on its opening weekend, but certainly had an effect on its sustainability at the box office. And honestly, some people may have stayed away, but I decided to include it anyway. So yes, these are movies that if you look at those ranges next to every film, could have had budgets at or above where we were with Joker, Folie, Adieu, but I couldn't get confirmation on that, so that's one big asterisk here. Whether those movies were above Joker or not, it doesn't really matter. Because the point is that Warner Brothers spent a massive amount of money on this film with full expectation that they were going to be able to get it back, that they would be able to replicate the success of the first movie, and they just couldn't do it. So let's dig down into what audiences thought and why it failed so spectacularly. First of all, when we look at it in the context of the Batman or Gotham-related movie franchise, it's the fourth lowest opening for a Batman or Gotham film. The lowest is Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which actually was a 2-day opening weekend. It was released on a Saturday, which was Christmas Day. Then we had Catwoman, which opened at $16.7 million. Birds of Prey, which opened at $33 million, right ahead of the next Harley Quinn live-action film, if you're talking about kind of Harley-focused, not including the Suicide Squad, which was Joker, Folie, Adieu, at $40 million. And this was something that really, I think, kind of puts it in perspective. At number 5 is 1989's Batman. This is not adjusted for inflation. So Joker, Folie, Adieu opened to less money on its opening weekend than Batman did in 1989, 35 years ago. That's how low this opening weekend was for a movie of its size. You don't even have to adjust those numbers. It comes in below Tim Burton's Batman. However, when you do adjust those numbers for the lowest Batman or Gotham-related film openings, we have Batman Mask of the Phantasm at $3 million adjusted for inflation, Catwoman at $27.8 million adjusted for inflation, then Joker, Folie, Adieu, which opened pretty much at the same number as Birds of Prey when you adjust those numbers for inflation. But again, Birds of Prey cost way less than Joker, Folie, Adieu. And then we have The Flash from last summer at $55 million. Now, this does exclude day-and-date releases and any limited events, which is really just Batman the Killing Joke, which had a very short theatrical run of just a few days. But, I mean, when you look at those last 3 movies there, those are all fairly recent films in the last 5 years or so. DC has really kind of taken a downturn, as has Warner Brothers. And The Flash and this Joker movie were both films that were expected at one point to blow the doors off the box office and just could not deliver. So the box office was low, but the audience reaction, if that's even possible, was somehow worse. I mentioned briefly before, Joker got a cinema score of D. And if you don't know what cinema score is, they are an organization. They send people out to test markets around the country on opening night for big movies. I think it's any movie that's in over 1,000 theaters. And you get a little card and you basically just rate the movie from A to F. An A plus obviously is great. Usually the score that we talk about for a big movie like this being in trouble is like in the B minus range. That's where we're used to seeing it. Joker, Folie, Adieu got a D, and that's actually the lowest ever cinema score for a film based on a comic book. I did the best research that I could. These are the comic book movies with the lowest cinema scores, at least the ones that I could find by going through the list of movies based on comics and also the Cinema Score website. So we had 9 movies that rated a C+, including Madam Web, Morbius, Batman and Robin, Mystery Men, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, A History of Violence, Jonah Hex, R.I.P.D., Spawn. All of those got a C+, which, if you know how grading works, is definitely higher than what Joker, Folie, Adieu got. Then we go to the C range. 7 movies that were based on comic books got a C. Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, 2019's Hellboy, 30 Days of Night, Monkey Bone, Aliens vs. Predator, Requiem, Surrogates, Virus are also in this list. Then we had 3 movies that rated a C minus. Four Stick, or Fantastic Four from 2015, which previously held the record for the lowest graded Marvel or DC film, is one of those 3 with a C minus. Then we had The Spirit, which got a C minus, and Whiteout, which is a movie I honestly don't remember. I don't think I'd even heard of it, but it was based on a comic book, so it was down there in the C minus range. But Joker, Folie, Adieu is now the basement dweller with a D. a first for the comic book genre, not the kind of first that Warner Brothers was looking for. And when you see that reaction, it's not just that people didn't like the movie. There are plenty of movies like Green Lantern or The Marvels or any number of comic book films that people didn't like that got way higher cinema scores. Cinema score, as we've often said here on the show, is also a measure of expectation. Did the audience get what they expected? Did they feel like it was something that was mismarketed, or did they feel lied to or deceived? And when you look at the response, it's obvious that that is at play here. It's not just that they didn't like the movie. It wasn't at all the movie they thought that they were going to get, either from the marketing or from what was happening in the first film. That is what helped to drive that cinema score lower. They didn't get what they paid for to a degree that we really haven't seen in the comic book genre thus far. This is interesting though. These are some other movies that have received D cinema scores, and really the whole list, I think there's about 30 movies, is a mix of genuinely, I think, bad films, and then some movies that were just kind of misunderstood or mismarketed or missold, but were reevaluated to some degree later on. So we have 1998's The Avengers, famously a terrible movie that nobody really liked. Wing Commander, another terrible movie that nobody really liked. The Happening, which is just a weird movie that I don't think people knew what to expect from, and certainly didn't expect what they got. The Last Exorcism, which is a very unsatisfying movie from a narrative level. Movie 43, which is just, I think it was sold with so many big stars, and people finally saw the film and they said, well, what the hell is that? But you look at the three that are over there kind of on the right-hand side. It Comes at Night, which was sold as a mainstream horror film, but definitely was not. It was well-reviewed critically, but audiences just didn't know what to make of it. And a lot of people that went to see it said, well, this isn't the movie I signed up to see. The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou from Wes Anderson. Again, much less mainstream than some of his previous work, and particularly a movie like The Royal Tenenbaums, which I think directly preceded Life Aquatic. And then American Psycho, which a lot of people now consider to be a classic, but which at the time just wasn't properly sold to audiences. They didn't know what they were in for, and they came out saying, well, what the hell was that? And I think that there's a little bit of that going on with Joker Folie Deux. Not to say that it's as good of a movie as American Psycho, because I don't think it is by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there's a lot of head scratching going on with Joker 2. And that comes down to the studio for marketing the movie the way that they did, and for greenlighting the movie that they did, because just in concept, it's not at all really like the first movie, and it takes so many different chances and risks, or bold moves, or stupid moves, or whatever you want to call it, narratively. I can understand people coming out saying like, well, what was that? That wasn't at all what I came to see. That's what CinemaScore helps to tell us. So when you look at those movies, I think the camp that says it's a terrible movie can find the movies here on this D CinemaScore list that would back up what you're saying. And I think that some people that are saying, hey, this movie was just misunderstood, can find movies on this list to back that up. Honestly, I'm somewhere in the middle. I did my full spoiler review and kind of broke down my thoughts on the film. I do think that it was mismarketed. And I think that people didn't know what to expect. And I think that it actually does have some really interesting things going on there. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people do, but I also do acknowledge that it is a very flawed movie, particularly in the execution of what it's trying to do. So I think it kind of charts that course in the middle of a not very good movie, and also a movie that just completely defied what audiences wanted or expected. And it's going to be interesting to see if it gets a reevaluation like some of the movies on this list, particularly American Psycho, in the years to come. So that's a post-mortem on week 1 of Joker Folie Deux, and I'm already dusting off my biggest drops for a comic book movie chart for next week, because I have a feeling we are going to see a massive week 2 drop. So chapter 2 of this story will continue. Let's talk about a few of the other movies that were in the top 10 this past weekend. First of all, The Wild Robot, which, as I mentioned, is at about $63.9 million. When we look at the highest non-sequel or remake grosses of the year so far, The Wild Robot is now at number 9 ahead of Challengers, and is very close to overtaking movies like The Beekeeper, Civil War, and Longlegs. And we'll see how far it can go up the list from there. Can it get to $100 million? Is it one of these movies that's going to hang around for the next few weeks? I certainly hope it does, because I think it was a really, really good film. But it just depends on whether families are going to want to go to the movies before we get into that Thanksgiving crush with a lot of the family films. Are they going to make time to see The Wild Robot? I don't really know the answer to that question. We'll see what happens in the next few weeks. Also, when we talk about Tim Burton's domestic grosses, Beetlejuice, as I mentioned, is hanging around really well, and it is now officially the second highest grossing Tim Burton film domestically, unadjusted for inflation. It passes 1989's Batman, although it's still well behind Alice in Wonderland back in 2010. And then Deadpool and Wolverine, I mentioned that it's still in the top 10. It has now tied Inside Out 2 for the longest run in the top 10 this year at 11 weeks. It bumps down Kung Fu Panda 4 and Despicable Me 4, which were both in the box office top 10 for 10 weeks. Then we have Dune Part 2, which was in the top 10 for 9 weeks. And if Deadpool and Wolverine can hang around for one more week, then it will take that record for 2024 with 12 weeks. But I don't know. We got some movies coming up this upcoming week. I think it could get bumped out. So usually we do revisions later in the show, but there's actually some shuffling in last week's 6 through 10 that affect the movies that dropped out of the top 10 both last week and this week. So I want to go back to September 27th through the 29th, number 6 through 10. Megalopolis was still number 6. There was not a miraculous amount of money added to its box office total. It was still at just over $4 million. Deadpool and Wolverine is at number 7. Never Let Go ended up at number 8. And much like the result would be if I entered a 10-person race, my old ass ended up in 9th place. But number 10 actually switched completely. Howl's Moving Castle, the 20th anniversary re-release, moved up into that number 10 spot with $2.1 million for the weekend last weekend. And when we look at the movies that dropped out when the final results came in, that means The Substance was actually not a top 10 movie last weekend, the 27th to the 29th. So we had 5 movies that dropped out: Alien Romulus after 6 weeks, Reagan after 4 weeks, Am I Racist after 2 weeks, and then The Substance after 1 week, and Jungkook, I Am Still after 1 week. So when we look at the movies that dropped out of the top 10 this past weekend, Never Let Go was out after 2 weeks, and then we had 3 films that only spent 1 week in the top 10: My Old Ass, Devar Part 1, and Howl's Moving Castle. But when you look at number 10 and 11 this week, it's kind of close between Megalopolis and My Old Ass. So we will see if Megalopolis actually ends up being a one-and-done movie in the top 10. And of course, I will update that next week if that turns out to be the case. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, Never Let Go lost the most theaters at 1,686. It fell out of wide release. It's now in 981. It Ends With Us shed most of its remaining theaters. It lost 1,293. It's also out of wide release in 307 theaters. The Substance lost most of its theaters, 1,026 of them. It's out of wide release at 686 remaining theaters. Transformers 1 lost a pretty good chunk of theaters. It lost 864. It's now playing in 3,106. And Am I Racist lost a little over half of its theaters. It's also out of wide release. It lost 668 and is now playing in 562 theaters. Looking at what I like to call my road to recovery, October has really flatlined. You see there the latest figures. The red line is the box office weekend average for 2021 to 2023. The blue line is the box office weekend average for 2015 through 2019. And then that dotted black line is where we've been every weekend this year. And you can see that we are only slightly above where we have been on average since theaters reopened back in 2021. The highest grossing movie for that window of time was Venom: Let There Be Carnage, which opened to over twice what we just saw with Joker: Folie. The highest grossing film for that 2015 to 2019 window was Joker back in 2019, which had a much higher opening weekend. The fall off has been pretty significant between these two films in a lot of ways. And we have a lot more to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this week's show. This video is brought to you by Mando. This is a weird time of year, at least it is sometimes in Arkansas. The mornings are cool, but the afternoons are hot. Sometimes you dress for yesterday's fall weather and get blasted with summer leftovers today. If you're like me, that means there's still a fair amount of sweating going on. But even if I'm sweating through my fall clothes, I don't have to worry about how I smell with Mando. Mando is a whole-body deodorant that's been clinically proven to control odor for 72 hours better than a shower with soap alone. And it comes in 4 cologne-quality scents like Mount Fuji, which I use for deodorant, and Bourbon Leather, which I use in the shower. I even keep a deodorant stick in my gym bag so I can run errands on the way home without worrying about smelling like, I've been at the gym. You can use Mando anywhere on your body that you want to make sure is up to snuff, and between their deodorant sticks and creams, body wash and cleansing bars, and deodorant wipes, they have you covered all day, every day, no matter what the day might bring. Plus, Mando is American-made, aluminum-free, baking soda-free, cruelty-free, dye-free, and vegan. Mando Starter Pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like a mini body wash or deodorant wipes, and free shipping. And if you want my recommendation, go with that bourbon leather scent. It adds just a touch of class. And I do have a discount code to help you get hooked on my favorite smelling whole body deodorant on the market. New customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use code DAN at shopmando.com. That's SHOPMANDO.com. Turning now from the domestic marketplace to the worldwide marketplace, these are the top 5 films internationally, so this is everywhere except for the US and Canada. At number 1 was Joker, Folie, Deux, which made $81.1 million, still less than anticipated, but not quite as big of a letdown as we saw here domestically. But again, we'll see what the fall off is. Reports are that word of mouth isn't much better in territories outside of the US and Canada. This was also Golden Week in China, which sees a bunch of new releases hitting theaters. The Volunteers to the War 2 made $45.1 million, the latest drama about China's military history. In third place was a film called Tiger, Wolf, Rabbit, a drama about 3 people who have lost children and how their lives intersect. In fourth place is the film Panda Plan, which made $13.7 million. Panda Plan stars Jackie Chan as himself, trying to rescue and protect a baby panda when the zoo is attacked or something like that. I don't know. The trailer looked interesting. And then in fifth place was The Wild Robot, which brought in $13 million as it still slowly rolls out around the world. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with the domestic numbers, we get our top 5 movies worldwide. And Joker, Folie, Deux is number 1 at $121.1 million, not one of the 5 biggest global openings of the year, but again, not as terrible as its domestic opening. The Volunteers to the War 2 is in second place, followed by The Wild Robot, which dropped 29.3% worldwide from last weekend. It makes another $31.7 million. Tiger, Wolf, Rabbit comes in fourth place, and Beetlejuice stays in the top 5. It drops 37.5% worldwide from last weekend for an $18.5 million total. All right, let's take a look at what I call some of our specialty charts, and we'll look first at the per theater average for this past weekend, October 4th through the 6th. At number 1 was Look Back, which played in just 2 theaters, but brought in $36,362 per theater. Look Back is an anime adaptation of the manga series from the creator of Chainsaw Man. It's about 2 young girls who bond over manga. It's only about an hour long, but I read that the theatrical release included some interviews and behind-the-scenes stuff, which kind of made it more of an event. I'm not sure if there are plans to expand Look Back into more theaters, but it did very well in the 2 that it played in. In second place was Saturday Night, which expanded a little bit to 21 theaters, bringing in $13,333 per theater. It gets a wide release this upcoming weekend. I reviewed Saturday Night here on the channel. You can find that review amongst the many other videos that I've done. In third place was Joker, Folie, Deux, which brought in $9,751 per theater in each of its 4,102 theaters. And remember, this movie is locked in for at least 2 weekends, so I think those theater owners are going to have a lot of empty seats. In fourth place is Separated, a new documentary from Errol Morris, who's kind of a superstar on the documentary scene. Separated is about family separations at the U.S.-Mexico border, and it brought in $8,766 in just 1 theater. And then in fifth place, we have Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal. It was in 302 Cinemark theaters nationwide and brought in $5,811 per theater. So it looks like a good move by Cinemark to strategically plan that movie to the markets where it would do well, and people actually showed up. Looking at the top 5 films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, at number 1 was Sam and Colby, The Legends of the Paranormal, at $1.75 million in 300 theaters. In second place was The Met Opera, and I'm just going to say the English translation of this title because I've already butchered Joker, Folie, Deux, I'm sure, plenty of times. The Tales of Hoffmann, which is the latest in the Met Opera's series of live-streamed operas in conjunction with Fathom Events. It brought in $586,000 in 700 theaters nationwide. In third place was The Outrun, starring Saoirse Ronan. She's getting some some pretty big Oscar buzz for this film, although it wasn't a huge debut for a movie that's got awards buzz. It played in 508 theaters and brought in $334,000. Kate Winslet's Lee came in fourth place at $285,000 in 465 theaters in its second week of release, and Saturday Night rounds out the top 5 in 21 theaters, bringing in $280,000 total. When we look at the seasonal fall holiday box office list, this is everything from after Labor Day to the end of the year. Beetlejuice is still number one by about $200 million. The Wild Robot climbs up one spot to number 2 at $63.9 million. Transformers 1 drops down one spot to number 3 at $47.2 million. Joker Folie Adieu opens in fourth place, much lower than people thought it probably would have even 2 or 3 weeks ago at $40 million. Speak No Evil gets bumped down one spot to number 5. Am I Racist moves down one spot to number 6. Never Let Go stays at number 7. The Substance goes down 2 spots to number 8. Megalopolis is able to make the overall fall top 10, at least for a week or two, at number 9 with $6.4 million. And Devara Part 1 is at number 10 at $5.57 million. No change on the 2024 annual domestic box office list, although Beetlejuice is lurking. It's now only about $2 million outside of being one of the top 5 films of the year. I think we're going to get there by this time next week. The top 4 remain the same, with Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, Despicable Me 4, and Dune Part 2 at the top, followed by Twisters at number 5, Beetlejuice right behind at number 6. Then we have kind of the entrenched order here: Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Bad Boys Ride or Die, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. And here's a chart we haven't seen in a while because there really hasn't been a change. The 2024 worldwide box office chart, and we're looking at it because Beetlejuice has replaced Bad Boys Ride or Die as the number 10 highest grossing worldwide film of the year at $402.6 million. Pegasus 2 was actually jumped by Successor, so Pegasus 2 is now at number 9 and Successor is at number 8. The top 7 remain the same, with YOLO, Kung Fu Panda 4, Godzilla Kong, The New Empire, Dune Part 2, and Despicable Me 4. And then the $2 billion films from this year thus far: Deadpool and Wolverine at $1.32 billion and Inside Out 2 at $1.68 billion. And that wraps up the box office charts for this week. Let's look now at the streaming charts, what people have been watching at home. And we'll start with the latest numbers from Netflix. These are their global viewing numbers from the week of September 23rd through the 29th. At number 1 was Monsters, Lyle and Eric Menendez, in its second week of release, which brought in 19.35 million views. In second place was Nobody Wants This, the Kristen Bell, Adam Brody rom-com series about an agnostic podcaster and a Jewish rabbi. Well, that sounds like an odd couple. That brought in 10.35 million views in its first week of release. Rebel Ridge still continues to hold strong at 8.86 million views, the third most watched program globally on Netflix for that week. Then we have Uglies at 8.71 million views. In fifth place is the Netflix original true crime documentary Jailbreak, Love on the Run, which brought in 7.55 million views. It's about a prison guard who helped an inmate escape, and there's obviously some love involved there. In sixth place was the Garfield movie, which debuts on Netflix at 6.95 million views. Then we have The Perfect Couple at just over 6 million views. Officer Black Belt at 5.12 million views. Debuting at number 9 is Bangkok Breaking, Heaven and Hell, a sequel from Thailand about a paramedic who gets caught up in a kidnapping plot. It brought in just over 5 million views. And then we have Culinary Class Wars Season 1 at 4.9 million views. It is a reality competition show from South Korea pitting 50 celebrity chefs against 50 unknowns. I don't know. That sounds kind of interesting. When we look at the most watched Netflix shows of 2024 thus far, just one minor adjustment. Emily in Paris Season 4 moves up to number 9 at 46.47 million views. That bumps American Nightmare Season 1 down to number 10 at 45.16 million views. The top 8 remain the same, led of course by Bridgerton Season 3, which is the only Netflix program to break 100 million reported views this year at 105.89 million. And then when we look at the most watched programs on Netflix, this is movie or show, Rebel Ridge continues to move up this list. It's now at number 8 at 95.23 million views. It's ahead of Baby Reindeer, which drops down to number 9. And if Rebel Ridge can get past 100 million views, which at its current trajectory seems pretty possible, it'll pass Fool Me Once, Society of the Snow, and Lift in order to enter the top 5 for 2024 thus far. Let's look now at the latest numbers from Nielsen. Now, the Nielsen data covers only domestic viewing, and it's delayed by about a month. So these are the numbers from September 2nd through the 8th. And let's look first at the 10 most watched movies. This was the debut week of Rebel Ridge, which comes in at 18.4 million hours watched, just outside of the 5 biggest debuts for a movie here in the US so far. The Deliverance comes in second place at 14.2 million hours watched, followed by Sonic the Hedgehog, which I believe hit Netflix, and 8.1 million hours watched. Aloha on Netflix comes in at number 4 at 6.4 million hours watched. Then we have The Fall Guy over on Peacock, Beetlejuice over on Max. This was when Beetlejuice was released in theaters, so we saw a spike in views for the original film to the tune of 5 million hours watched. Then we have The Union on Netflix, Migration on Netflix, The Rundown, which is a Dwayne Johnson movie that I guess was one of those movies that got added randomly and hit the top 10, 3.4 million hours watched. And then our old standby, Moana, which comes in at number 10 with another 3.1 million hours watched. Looking at the most watched streaming shows for that particular week, September 2nd through the 8th, at number 1 was The Perfect Couple, which brought in a big domestic number, 31.8 million hours watched. That is very impressive. Family Guy on Hulu was the second most watched streaming show that week at 17.7 million hours watched. Prison Break is right behind at number 3 at 17.4 million hours watched. Lord of the Rings of Power, slips down to number 4 in its second week of availability for that season 2 run at 16.9 million hours watched, followed by Bluey at number 5, Chaos on Netflix debuting at number 6, Grey's Anatomy at number 7, A Discovery of Witches on Netflix at number 8, Bob's Burgers at number 9, and Worst Ex Ever at number 10. And The Perfect Couple actually had one of the best debuts for a streaming series we've seen this year at number 4 with that 31.85 million hour watch time. That comes in ahead of Griselda, which brought in 26.5 million hours watched on its first week, but behind Avatar: The Last Airbender, Fallout, and Fool Me Once, which remains the most watched streaming series debut of the year, and I believe it was also the first week of the year. Also, Lord of the Rings of Power is dropping off compared to last season, and I'm keeping track week by week so I can put together a more comprehensive chart of just how the performance is. But those hours watched does boost it to the third most watched Amazon Prime program since they began reporting Nielsen data back in 2020. So it jumps over both Fallout and Jack Ryan for that number 3 spot, although it's got about 100 million more hours of watch time to rack up if it wants to get up to where Reacher is, and then much, much more if it wants to get where The Boys is at number 1. Looking at the top streaming shows as far as watch time per available episode for September 2nd through the 8th, at number 1 was The Perfect Couple with 5.3 million hours of watch time per episode. It's only a 6-episode series and put up a lot of runtime. Worst Ex Ever comes in second at 2.79 million hours watched per episode, followed by Fight Night, the $1 Million Heist. We had a 3-episode debut, I believe, of that show. It brought in 1.92 million hours watched per episode. Then we have Chaos at number 4, and Lord of the Rings of Power comes in at number 5 with 1.42 million hours watched per episode, although keep in mind that is for both season 1 and then the available episodes for season 2 at that time. The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which sounds kind of like a 30 Rock show that Jack Donaghy would make up, comes in 6th place at 852,000 hours watched per episode, followed by The Accident at number 7, The Discovery of Witches at number 8, Outlast at number 9, and Only Murders in the Building as it continues its season run at number 10 with just over 280,000 hours watched per episode. Finally, looking at the most watched library streaming series since Nielsen started reporting data in 2020. So it's not just this year, this is since 2020. Gilmore Girls had a little bit of a spike in viewership for the last reporting week, which is able to bump it up over Supernatural to become the 8th most watched library streaming show that Nielsen's been able to report data on. That moves Supernatural down to number 9. Heartland is at number 10. And then the top 7 remains the same. Grey's Anatomy, the most watched library streaming show since 2020 with 2.45 billion hours of watch time, followed by NCIS, Cocomelon, Bluey, and Criminal Minds. And that's it for this week's Charts with Dan. Let's look at a few things that are coming out later this week that you might be interested in. On Thursday, a new animated series debuts on Netflix, Tomb Raider: The Legend of Lara Croft. Continuing from video game continuity, Lara Croft is voiced by Haley Atwell in this series. Also debuting Thursday on Netflix is season 4 of Outer Banks. This is one of those part 1, part 2 splits. So part 1 of this season debuts this upcoming Thursday. Part 2 will be coming next month. And also on Thursday is the debut of Caddo Lake on Max. This is a Max original movie starring Dylan O'Brien and produced by M. Night Shyamalan about strange happenings that occur when a young girl disappears. Moving on to Friday, there is a real thought from some people that Terrifier 3 may win the Battle of the Clowns at the box office this upcoming weekend. This is a franchise that has been picking up momentum. Will the drop-off for Joker Folie Deux be enough to put Terrifier 3 in first place, or are people just getting a little too carried away? I don't know, but Terrifier 3 will be hitting theaters on Friday. I am working on a review of all 3 films, so I'm going to watch Terrifier 1. I actually already have Terrifier 2. Then I'll catch Terrifier 3 and bring you my thoughts on all 3 of them. Also hitting theaters this Friday is Piece by Piece, the documentary about Pharrell told entirely in Lego. That looks kind of fun. I'm super excited about this. Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, following its successful Fathom event, will have a wide release this upcoming weekend. So if you didn't get a chance to see it through the Fathom event, you can hopefully catch it at a theater near you this upcoming weekend. And I cannot recommend it enough. I've reviewed it here on the channel. I think it's a fantastic documentary, particularly if you enjoy Christopher Reeve, the character of Superman, etc. It is a really, really good movie. It's getting close to Halloween, which means The Nightmare Before Christmas is hitting theaters once again. This is pretty much an annual event at this point, so if you want to see it on the big screen, this weekend is your chance. Also hitting select theaters is The Apprentice, which is the controversial biopic about Donald Trump set in the 1980s. Jeremy Strong also co-stars. The Apprentice is being distributed by Briarcliff, which also just picked up Jonathan Majors' star turn in Magazine Dreams for distribution next year. Magazine Dreams was a big festival hit that got delayed after his journey through the criminal justice system. So Briarcliff, I guess, is really trying to make a reputation by picking up controversial films, and it will be putting The Apprentice in theaters this upcoming weekend. In select theaters, and then expanding over the next few weeks this upcoming weekend, is We Live in Time, starring Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield. This looks like a real tearjerker. I'm hoping it plays near me soon, though, because the trailer looked pretty good. Hitting select theaters this weekend is Brothers, starring Josh Brolin and Peter Dinklage as, well, you guessed it, Brothers. The trailer for this movie looks really funny. Now, this is a streaming movie, so it's probably not going to be in very many theaters, but it hits Amazon on October 17th. So if you can't see it in theaters, you can catch it on Amazon Prime Video soon. And then finally on Friday on Apple TV Plus, we have the debut of Disclaimer, which is a 7-part series written and directed by Alfonso Cuarón about a journalist whose past comes back to haunt her. This stars Cate Blanchett, Kevin Kline, Sacha Baron Cohen, among many others. The first 2 episodes debut this Friday, with the remaining episodes coming out weekly. This looks really interesting, and I think this may be an Apple TV Plus show that I actually watch in real time. That will make like 2 of them. And that's just a few of the things that you can catch this upcoming week and weekend. Thank you so much for tuning into the show and spending a big part of your Monday here with me. Don't forget to check out the description below for more about our sponsor, Mando, as well as how to become a channel member if you'd like to do that. And stay tuned right here for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.